Alright, so this is going to be my first JoJo what if, and if you guys want more in the future, then just comment down below that you would want more JoJo what ifs. So this is going to be one of the videos that I made a poll on, that I said which do you want the most priority over, and this was the actual third. They got last place, right? I was thinking of not doing this, but then I asked people, and a lot of people still wanted this to happen, so I'm gonna do it. So this what if is going to be, what if Jonathan Joestar from Phantom Blood Part 1 of JoJo had a stand. So if you guys don't know what a stand is, it's basically a representation of your fighting spirit. There's a few rules that comes with stands, but not all stands follow these rules. One is that stands can only be hurt by other stands. Two, only people with stands can see stands. And let me see. I don't think there's other rules other than that. But not all stands follow this rule. Things like in part 4, I forgot her name. I think her name's Yukako. I don't remember, but her stand is basically her hair. So some stands are visual, and some stands can be hurt by other things other than stand users, but it's very rare and not very it's few and far between, right? So I'll get this out of the way before anyone types this out. I know Jonathan technically has a stand in part 3 called the Passion or Hermit Purple 2, but we're not gonna use that because it's boring and it would just make the fights kind of easy because no one would see it, and then he would just win against Dio like that. So we're actually gonna do a unique stand that that's not in the series, at least I don't think. I'm gonna call it Under the Sun, and the musical reference for this is actually it's a song by the same name by Black Sabbath called Under the Sun. And I chose this because the song is about living your life the way you want to be, and not getting told what to do, and believing in yourself and not trusting others. And I chose this for a specific reason. It's because in JoJo Part 1, there's a major theme overall. There's an overarching theme about how these two brothers are fated to fight and always continue to fight, and their bloodlines are fated to fight. So this is basically Jonathan rejecting that idea of fate and rejecting, his destiny and making his own path through life. So that's why I chose it. So how the appearance of the stand is going to look like basically it's Jonathan in a suit of armor minus the helmet, and it's going to be a silver armor, suit of armor with golden flames coming out of every nook and cranny. That's how I visualized it. And yeah, so let's get into the stand stats. The first stat is power, which has an A. Second is speed, which has a B. Range has a D. Durability has an A. Precision has a C, and potential has an A. So why does it have an A in power? Well, the first ability that I'm going to call is going to be the same name as a stand, Under the Sun, which basically what it does is the more hits you take or apply onto others, your suit of armor, the heat that you give off, will actually grow in temperature. So that's the first ability. And the second ability is called Cast Your Soul, which is a lyric from the song itself. And it also, what it does is uh, Jonathan's able to harness his hormone throughout the suit, and he could either put the hormone into his suit to make his flames bigger and like burn brighter without having to hit anything or get hit himself, or he could actually turn these flames into a weapon, but only one at a time. And if he uses the hormone to put back to put into his suit, then any weapon that he would have out would also go in. The flames would return to his suit. So yeah, speed. I would say it would give him a bit of a speed boost. This suit of armor. Range, because it's only like a normal, range, like a little bit less than a human, because you can only apply it to yourself, right? Durability makes sense. It's a suit of armor. Precision, I gave it a C because it doesn't really give you any precision bonus. It all has to rely on Jonathan's own precision. And then potential, I gave it an A because how young he got it. He gets it at 18. That's when he starts the entire like journey. And I also gave him an A because of the fact that he's a prodigy with hormone. So if you don't know, a C, if I remember this right, a C in this stats means that it's like around human level. So yeah. Basically, so when we start off this what if, it's gonna be starting about a little bit different. Dario Brando still finds Jonathan's father George, and the suitcase opens up and he sees the stone mask. But there's also another thing that's also that falls out of the suitcase. This is actually the stand arrow. This is one of the ways that a person can acquire a stand. What happens is, if you are hit by this arrow and you are injured in any way, and if you survive the hit, or let me restate that, you will get hit by this arrow, and if you have enough fighting spirit and willpower or potential, then you will get a stand based off of your personality and things like that. And if you do not have those qualifications, then you will die if the shot or the hit from the arrow is fatal. We saw this with Koichi. If he didn't get healed by Josuke, then he would have died, because he did not have the potential to become a stand user. In the main series, George Joestar and his wife had the stone mask in their possession, so we could assume that they traveled to various places and acquired some artifacts. So I'm going to say that they also acquired the stand arrow, and because they were so kept together, they were assumed to go with each other. So everything goes as normal as it is in canon. Dio's still a terrible person to Jonathan, and we get to the part where Jonathan is actually confronting Dio about poisoning his father. So Jonathan tells Dio that father had already taken the antidote, and we know that you are the one who poisoned him. And Dio, what he does at this point, knowing that he's out of options, he tries to lure Jonathan closer to him in order to basically kill him and put on the stone mask. And he tells Jonathan, please, I know that it is my poverty is what led me down this road. It made me greedy, and it made me turn on the person who basically gave me this opportunity. And Jonathan's kind of like, he is surprised at the fact that Dio is saying this, because he assumed that Dio would want to fight him. So Dio continues and says, please, let me do this last thing and let me turn myself in. as Jonathan's getting closer to him, this is when Speedwagon speaks out and says, "Don't trust him. I've been around, the slums enough, and you need to have a nose for this situation. You need to know, the good from the bad. And I could tell this person is bad. Was it his upbringing? No. This man was born evil." And this is when he takes a step back, and Dio actually gets angry, and this is when George and the police actually show up behind the curtain, and George is distraught at the fact that the person he's been raising to be his own son had poisoned him, and he doesn't want to see this. And this is when Jonathan tells his father George, "Please, father, you shouldn't be witness to this." And he's like, "You're right, I will go upstairs." But before he does this, Dio's put in a situation where he has no other options left, and he tells Jonathan, "My downfall was my hubris, and this is part of the human condition, but I reject that." And Jonathan's like, what do you mean by reject? And this is when Jonathan actually goes to stab, or not Jonathan, Dio goes to stab Jonathan, but in this case he uses the stand arrow head instead of the sacrificial knife. And George is actually too slow to actually get in front of the arrow in time, so Jonathan actually blocks it with his forearm, and Dio uses that blood to put on the mask and actually turns himself, the mask activates and stabs into his brain. While this is happening, the police actually they all fire their guns and shoot Dio, knocking him outside and through the window. At this point, everyone's worried for Jonathan because he was stabbed in the arm, but he says, "Do not worry, it's only a flesh wound." And he notices that it quickly heals up, and he doesn't know why it did. And this is when Dio gets up and rises, this is when the police chief actually explains that he should have taken out Dario and sent him to prison or jail, but it was George who actually stopped him from that. And after he's done telling this tale, we see something poke the back of his head and actually decapitate the top half of his head, and it gets thrown. And the creature who did this was Dio, as he's hanging upside down. And he takes a piece, he takes the body that he just decapitated and throws it at the other police chiefs, and it basically kills them by it tears them apart just like the anime. And this also hits Speedwagon, which kind of like hits him in the arm and almost basically breaks his arm. So Jonathan is he doesn't know what to he knows what to do. He goes towards the spear that one of the knights were holding, those knights that are for decoration were holding, and he actually tries to use that against Dio. And the fight goes exactly as in the anime, but in this version I would say that George is actually alive. So we cut back a day later, and Speedwagon is going through the house that or the hospital, I guess you would say, back in that time. And he's going through the hallways, and he sees this girl actually tending to the wounds or the burns of Jonathan, and he sees her fingers, and he's thinking to himself, wow, this person must care for him a lot because her fingers are cracked because of all the water damage. So she must have been tending to his wounds around the clock. and this girl turns out to be Arena, which is his basically a girl that he fancied in the past. And they have their reunion as normal, and his recovery's normal, and we do a little it's like a little bit later, probably a few days later, and this is the part where they're walking down, or Jonathan is actually looking through the rubble of the house, and this is where he finds the stand arrow, because that was the piece that Dio was not able to get. So he keeps that away, thinking that Dio will not be able to make any more vampires with it. So then they walk down that path as usual, and then they see this man wearing white and a peculiar hat, and he's eating lunch. So they think nothing of it. Oh wait, never mind. That's not how it happens in the anime. They actually see a man, or Jonathan notices a man is following him, and he doesn't understand why. And then when he looks forward, that's when the man is actually eating lunch, and he tells him, you actually survived the stone mask. Not many men can say that. This man who just said that was William Zeppeli. And as he's saying this, he's actually leaping to go in front of Jonathan and actually hits him in the diaphragm using his pinky. And Arena is shocked by this and saying, "What are you doing? He's barely starting to recover and his bones are broken. How could you do such a thing?" And he says, "Do not worry. What I did was I used his own breathing to actually heal his bones." And Jonathan actually feels these. He says, "I could feel my bones, they're mending." And this is the part where, he tells him that my duty is to find the stone mask and destroy it. And I want you to help me accomplish this goal. He's like, "Let me show you something." And they go towards that little stream, and William Zeppeli basically gets his Gucci boots wet when he steps into the stream, and he's making ripples around, and Jonathan is amazed by this. So he basically sends the hormone energy through his fist, through the frog, and actually breaking the stone. And Jonathan is amazed by this, and so is Arena. And Jonathan basically states that he will actually help him, or not that. William says, "You need to learn this or you're going to die." And Jonathan just thinks about it for a minute, and he puts his arm and he grabs a branch, and this is when his stand activates under the sun, and that's when the armor appears, and that's actually his hormone is still going through the branch, giving it making it bloom. Oh yeah, if I forgot to mention this, I also chose a suit of armor for a knight, because Jonathan's entire personality is about being chivalrous, so that makes sense. Okay, so this is one of the stands that you're able to see if you're not a stand user. I'm just saying. So Jonathan doesn't really notice this, just how he does in the anime, but William actually sees this, and he's amazed because he's never seen anything like this, and all he could assume is that he's so powerful with hormone that it's actually manifesting physically. So he's even more amazed. He actually thinks that this guy might be a better protege at hormone than even Tom Petty himself, which is the person who taught Zeppeli. So let's do another small time skip to the part where they need to fight Jack the Ripper. So they're in that tunnel, and Zeppeli tells Jonathan, "Imagine what the best option that your opponent's going to do, because that's what they're going to do. So in this situation, the best option for him is to block our exit." And that's what Jack the Ripper does. He picks up the carriage and throws it towards the ceiling of the tunnel near the entrance, and it actually collapses. And this is when William Zeppeli says, watch and learn. He fills his glass with, wine, and he actually does a homo knee to Jack the Ripper's face, causing it to melt a bit, and basically gives the wine glass to Jonathan and says, now you try. At the same time as this happening, Jack the Ripper switches a lever on, which opens a secret passageway. Before Jonathan follows Jack the Ripper, Zeppeli gives him a little bit of advice, and he says, there were no Vikings in Norway before the cold winds, and if you spill any of this wine, it doesn't matter how utterly you defeat this foe, I will basically abandon you. And Speedwagon basically protests this, but he says he's like, be quiet, I know what I'm doing. And Jonathan follows, trying to keep the glass steady. So he keeps his armor up because it's a source of light and he doesn't need a torch. But he realizes that this light is actually, it basically makes him a target on his back, right? So this is when Jack the Ripper tries to hit Jonathan with that his like weird weapon, that like clippers or something, and he hits his arm, but it doesn't actually do anything because it's armor. And because he hit him, the heat off of his armor actually increases. So he runs back into a corner, and Jonathan notices rippling within the wine, and he figures out that he can send the hormone through the glass, through his arm, throughout his entire body, and then through the stone. And this is where he figures out where Jack the Ripper was. And Jack the Ripper doesn't know exactly where he is because he's not in a position where he's able to see the light, and Jonathan's not wounded in this version, so he can't smell his blood. So Jonathan knows where he's at and sends hormone straight through the stone and into Jack the Ripper, causing him to melt and basically perish. And this is when William basically says Jonathan has become a Viking. So we do another time skip to when they get to the village, and they see that it's a good harvest, but then he also remembers that Dio is still out there and he needs to stop him. And when they're walking, a boy cuts a piece of rope, and this actually flings him across. As he's going across the air, he actually grabs the bag that Speedwagon had gotten, and this character that just did this was actually Poco. He goes across the river with the bag which contains their money, and he climbs this cliff. And Jonathan takes this as a learning experience, and William and him actually try to walk across water, which they do successfully. This is when Jonathan, uses his hormone to send through the rocks to actually knock him down, and he catches Poco, and he realizes that it's sunset and the sun goes down, and he's even more he panics a little bit because he realizes that he's in a cemetery and that someone brainwashed this boy to steal him and lure him to this spot. And a zombie actually grabs the leg of Jonathan, and this is when he turns on his armor and he basically burns the zombie alive, instead of how he did in the anime where he just kicked him off. And they look up, and they look up to this like where the top of the cliff was, and they see Dio standing at the top. This is when William actually says a man like Dio should not be in possession of the stone mask. And Dio basically retorts this by saying, what can a puny, insignificant human like yourself understand anything of my greatness? And he actually does that thing where he like emits his own hatred outwards, and this actually pulls back Zeppeli, and he states that his hatred alone almost knocked him over. And you know, this is when Zeppeli leaps in to go and punch Dio, and Dio, grabs his hand as he's punching him, and what he does is that he evaporates all the moisture in his arm and actually absorbs all the heat nearby. This causes Zeppeli's arm to freeze, and this is the canon explanation how he does it. So don't get mad at me if the science doesn't actually work. So this is what he does, and he actually freezes his arm. And Zeppeli, I think he goes for another hit, or no, Dio actually tries to go and hit Zeppeli, but this is when Jonathan blocks him, and he actually activates his armor, and he flows the heat. He uses his hormone to create, to go into his armor to make it even hotter than it should be. And I also forgot to mention this, but when he does this, he actually becomes stronger also when he puts hormone into his suit, into his armored suit. So Dio, feeling the heat and not wanting to, not being able to counteract it because it's so hot and his freeze doesn't really work, he actually backs off and retreats. And he says, I revived these two knights because their stories are so interesting. And these knights are actually, let me see. I wrote their names down because they're pretty weird. The smaller one is actually called Bluford, and the bigger one is called Turucus. I think it's called Turucus. Turucus. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. So, they explains that these two served under the Queen of Scotland, and basically Queen Elizabeth took the Queen of Scotland and they went on a rampage through England to try to get her back, and they basically massacred a bunch of knights. It came to the point where they actually made a deal with Elizabeth, saying if they would surrender, then they would release the queen. And being knights, they actually accept this deal. And by surrender, she means execution. So on their execution day, the executioner basically says, you basically just gave up your lives for nothing because your queen's already dead. And he points to her, and that's where the dead head of the Queen of Scotland is. And this is when they curse the queen. Cut back to the actual fight. So in this part, I would say that Zeppeli's arm is actually fully healed because Jonathan would heat it up using his armor ability, instead of that weird ab scene with Speedwagon. And they see what's his name again? Turucus actually break an entire boulder with one finger, and this shocks everyone there. And Bluford sees Jonathan, and he says, "This man thinks that he's the best at it in his time, so I will fight him." And he does that hair attack that he does in the anime, but the difference is his hair gets burned immediately and does not absorb any of his blood because his armor burns it. His stand ability under the sun burns it. So he gets a little bit of respect for Jonathan and says, "This man has, a fighting spirit. Master Dio, can I fight this man in a duel?" And Dio agrees, and he basically says, "I don't have any time for this. You two end their lives, and I'm out of here," basically. And he would do that. When Bluford's trying to fight Jonathan, he actually leaps towards him and with his arms behind his back, and Jonathan does not know what's going to happen. But then he doesn't know which hand is going to use the sword. But then he realizes, or he doesn't realize, he notices that he's actually using his hair to swing the sword. This catches Jonathan a little bit off guard. But this is when he uses, he creates, using his cast of soul ability from his stand, to make a fiery sword to actually block the hit directly. But this still knocks him into the lake, and the weight of the armor is actually dragging him deeper, and Bluford's right next to him, and he says, my armor is weighing me down, and so is yours, so why don't we race and see who gets to the surface first, since he doesn't really need oxygen to survive. But then Jonathan turns off his stand, and he thinks, remembers the time his father gave him advice, and he thinks about the time when he was playing with his dog. He's like, if you want to take away the gun from Danny, because you know how he's biting onto it, instead of trying to take it away, why don't you just give it to him? And he remembers that, so he swims deeper into the lake, because he knows that it's a mining town, so there's going to be air within the soil, because there's going to be caves underneath it. So that's when he actually gets Hormone, and he does his I think it's called a turquoise sunset overdrive, to actually launch and actually hurt Bluford. So they get back to the surface, and his arm is melted off. So Bluford tries to basically wrap himself around around him, try to tie him to a tree. But this is when Jonathan actually activates his stand again, and the armor goes and breaks the hair, and it actually sends a little bit of hormone through him, and this actually causes a little bit of pain for Bluford. Bluford basically says, this does not even, the pain is bearable if it means to fight you. And Jonathan is kind of, taken back by this. And when what's it called? He basically tests Bluford, and this is when he just stands still as Bluford tries to attack him, but Bluford actually stops before he makes that much of an impact on him. And he questions Jonathan why, and he basically explains that even though you're a zombie, you still have your chivalrous side to you, and Bluford, kind of breaks down and explains, he's basically gaining his humanity back, and slowly, as the hormone inside of him is actually burning him up. And he says, may I have the name of the man who bested me? And this is when Jonathan says, my name is Jonathan Joestar. And this is when Bluford offers him his sword of luck. But before he gives it to him, he says, let me apply my own charm to it. And he cuts his finger a bit and uses his blood to spell, to put a P at the beginning to make it pluck, the sword of pluck. And Jonathan's kind of, he takes the sword gracefully, and he gets angry of Dio because, they didn't choose to be resurrected. He forced them to do this. And before he could actually grieve for what had just happened. This is when Tarukas actually comes and steps on the armor of Bluford and basically dishonors him. He says, "This man always trying to go with strategy. It was just pointless. I carry a sword that's as big as a man. I don't need strategy." And before Jonathan can actually react to this is when he just slams the sword into the ground, and it causes a piece of the cliff to fall into the it's causing it to like slide into the canyon. And William and Jonathan do that thing where they make a hang glider out of leaves and they go into that building with where the knights used to train, and Tarukas follows them. So we get to the part where Tarukas and Jonathan are both chained up, and Tarukas explains that this is a death match, and he goes for a kick towards Jonathan. Jonathan turns on his stand and catches his leg and puts the hormone into his stand, which actually makes it burn even more. And he actually takes Tarukas' leg off. And unlike Dio, the minions themselves cannot regenerate, so he can't get this back. So what Jonathan does is he puts all of his hormone into his arms, and basically he pulls on the chain so hard that this actually decapitates Tarukas. So William Zeppeli is still alive in this version. This is when William Zeppeli is kind of confused, but then he remembers what Tom Petty had told him. It's a little bit different than it is in the anime. When Tom Petty actually checks his future, he says he cannot. There is too many ripples in his future, and it is uncertain. Because of the introduction of the stand arrow, it actually changes his future. So that's my explanation for this. So Jonathan doesn't get that boost for the hormone. So they get back into town, and Paco actually talks to that villager and asks, like, is everything okay? Is my sister okay? And he says, no, nothing's okay, or not everything's okay. She's very angry at you, and he takes this as a sigh of relief, and they continue to walk. But then it turns out that this guy who he was just talking to was actually a zombie. And Zeppeli actually does his spinning hormone kick that he would have used against Tarukas, but he actually uses it against this zombie, and he kills it. And this is when Dyer, Tom Petty, and Straitso actually comes into the picture, but Jonathan doesn't know who they are, so he assumes that they're all the zombies or something like that. So Dyer still does that cross split attack that he does in the anime, and Jonathan still headbutts him, and Dyer compliments him on his strategy, and they explain everything. And this is when Tom Petty says to William, it seems that you overcame faith. I'm proud of you. And they go to the castle that Dio is located, and they find one of Dio's minions over or trying to eat Paco's sister. And this servant is actually called Doobie. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's the guy with the snakes coming out of his head. Before he could actually hit or eat Paco's sister, I think her name is, I forgot what they called her, but basically they drop an anvil on him, and he's confused, like, who did that? And Jonathan basically says, I would have introduced myself, but a zombie like you doesn't deserve it. And he goes down and he gets bitten by the snakes, and Doobie actually thinks he's won. But this is when Jonathan just uses his hormone to push out the poison from his body, and uses his hormone to make the snakes attack him, and he melts. So when they get to the the place where Dio is located, he is shocked that they're here, and here pretty soon, because this is actually it's not that difference in time as it is in the anime, but he's still shocked, and he says to Jonathan, I get no pleasure out of doing this. You are my brother, and I hate to make you into a zombie, but as an emperor I cannot be soft. So this is when they actually start to fight. Since William is still alive in this version, Dyer wouldn't go up first to try to fight Dio. And the way that this would work is Jonathan would use his sword of luck and pluck to try to fight Dio. He would hit him, but Dio would catch the blade and he would freeze it, so the hormone wouldn't work, and it wouldn't flow through his body. And as he's doing this, he's actually Jonathan has his armor on, so it doesn't freeze his arm, and he's pushing Dio back near the edge. And this is when Dio actually goes for his left side and actually tries to hit Jonathan and try to go for his neck, but Jonathan actually blocks it with a shield made out of fire, and he puts his hormone into this, and actually as Dio hits this engulfs him in fire that's infused with hormone, and this actually incinerates Dio to ashes, and there's basically nothing left. So Dio actually dies, and Jonathan basically he stands silent, and he sheds a single tear, knowing that he was the one who had to put down his brother, and he basically collects his ashes into a small bag that he was given by one of the hormone monks, right? And soon, this is when all the other minions come to attack, and Jonathan just he doesn't really fight. He has everyone else do it, and he just stares into the sky, reflecting on what he just did, and when we cut to a week later, they're on the cruise to America, and he's married Arena, and he spreads Dio's ashes across the ocean, knowing that he can't bury him next to his father. Okay, so that's basically how part 1 would go, in my opinion. For the other parts, part 2 would go as the same, I would think, just that Jonathan would be there, because hormone training can make you, because he would still continue to grow as a character, so his stand would mature, and he would still continue his hormone training, because that's the kind of person Jonathan is. So Joseph's character would be the same, because he thinks the old ways of fighting aren't good, so he would still be a trickster. I think he'd have an easier time fighting, since Jonathan would be there to help with the fights, and he would have a male figure in his life, because I still think that George Joestar, which is, I think it would be Jonathan's son, but Jonathan's son's named after his father, I believe. So I think he would die, because even though you can inherit stands, it doesn't always mean you'll get one. We could see this with Jolene. Before she was stabbed with the piece of the stand arrow, she didn't have a stand, so I would think it'd be the same. And Lisa, which is Joseph's mother, would still have to basically leave, because she would kill that army soldier who was the one who killed George. So basically, the part would still go the same. It's just that Jonathan was there, and I don't think Kars would reach his ultimate form because of Jonathan being there. They get an extra, stronger hormone user in the mix. And even at this point, Jonathan still has the stand arrow, so I would think he would use it on Joseph to actually give him Hermit Purple way earlier than he does in the series. So that would be a thing. Part 3 doesn't happen, but I would say that JoJo still gets his stand through inheriting it from, through the bloodline. I think George wouldn't, because he wouldn't have like any strong will. That's why he wasn't like a natural at hormone. So it'd still be Star Platinum, I would think. But basically he just grows up to be a normal like person, but he still, since Joseph's kind of different because Jonathan did have an influence on him. He would tell him to train and things like that. So I think he would train JoJo how to use his powers. So he would eventually figure out how to do time stop. Part 4 actually does happen as it does in canon, because I think Joseph would still have that affair and create Josuke, and I think he would still get, Crazy Diamond, and all that stuff would happen. Part 5 doesn't exist because no Dio, no Giorno. Part 6 doesn't happen because, or it happens but it's different. No Poochie, so I don't really know what happened in part 6, so I don't know what to say. Part 7's in a different universe. So yeah, thanks to everyone who's been subscribing. This is gonna be my 100 subscriber special. I hope you like it. It's gonna be my longest video to date, and if you want me to go into more detail for like part 2, just tell me in the comments. But if not, this is just gonna be the standalone video. I'm not gonna do a part 2 unless requested to. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.